Hey everyone, this is Brad Hughes, School Principal and Chief Encouragement Officer from Ontario, Canada. And I've got some good news for you. You found the Good News, Brad News podcast, amplifying stories of heart-led educators moving from positive intention to action. Great people like you, improving kids' lives through service, connection, and finding the fun. So glad you're here. Let's get started. Hey there, welcome back. So glad you're here and that you've tuned in to episode 22 of the Good News, Brad News podcast. I am your host, Brad Hughes, and as you settle in and get comfortable, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling 22, and everything will be all right if I move along swiftly and introduce my guest, educator, consultant, and writer, Craig Randall. Now, Craig's experience as a counselor, coach, teacher, and principal set him up perfectly to develop a model of teacher observation focused on building trusting relationships that spark teaching and learning growth. As the author of Trust-Based Observations, Craig is on a mission to change the world of teacher observations to a model of support that fosters risk-taking, innovation, and creativity. Now, Craig and I discuss a number of things near and dear to both of us, including nurturing community cultures in which feedback for growth is not just welcome, but sought. How everything speaks and how integrity grows potential to influence others towards greater contributions. And how trust and support are antidotes to isolation and fear. Trust is the glue of life, wrote educator, author, and speaker Stephen Covey. It's the foundational principle that holds all relationships. From infancy, we look to our caregivers for warmth, contact, soothing, and reassurance. To have our developing sense of the world reflected back to us, anchoring us, motivating and encouraging us to make our first sounds, to risk our first steps, and so many other firsts, to reinforce that our presence and growth delights and impacts others. When we felt stressed, frightened, in discomfort or pain, those first trusting relationships reminded us that we were not alone, that we were heard and cared for. The need for trust that anchored us as infants is not so different now as adults. And your trusting relationships today are likely the ones in which you feel seen, safe, understood, supported, challenged, and growing. Stephen Covey understood the interdependence of trust and growth. Trust is the highest form of human motivation, he wrote. It brings out the very best in people. Take a moment now and think of the people and relationships in your life that are the most trusted. Who are they? And how did they come to be so trusted? That trust may have been founded on a single remarkable occasion when someone showed up for you or you for them. It may have grown over time, a consistent thread of support through so many shared successes and setbacks, triumphs, or even tragedies. Too often, we may assume trust is a social imperative or prerequisite of position or status, especially if we assume that our beliefs are known and understood. When you get clear on your beliefs, name those beliefs to the people in your life, and act accordingly, that's when you create the conditions for trustworthiness. Consistency is key to trust. Authenticity, integrity when beliefs and actions align. The greater the consistency, the greater the alignment, the greater the potential for trust to flourish. Like when we were infants, it's that trust that allows us to move from fear, which immobilizes us, to hope, that we can find it within ourselves to risk that next step, knowing that we will not need to take that step alone. In the words of scholar and activist Barbara Smith, where trust is, love can flourish. It's this kind of trust and ensuing growth that my guest Craig Randall advocates for. Craig names his belief that trust brings out the very best in people. And it really shows. Trust me, you'll love getting to know Craig today, and after hearing his story, you'll be eager to connect with him too. So, here's my interview with consultant and author Craig Randall today on the Good News, Brad News Podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to the Good News, Brad News Podcast. Tonight, I'm chatting with an incredible educator, author, someone we're going to dig into the concept of trust, developing trust so that we can develop the best in those that we work with. My guest is Craig Randall. Craig, welcome to the Good News, Brad News Podcast.
Hey, Brad, how are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Craig, I always like to start by asking my guests to tell our listeners all about the different roles in your life, your family, professional, personal, community roles. What do people need to know about Craig Randall?
Well, I'm married to the best educator I know, my wife, Michelle, who is a new teacher mentor and who absolutely loves her job. Regularly, she comes home and says, I can't believe I'm doing this job. I love it so much. I have 19-year-old twins that are in sort of a semi-holding pattern with starting university. But by September, we think they'll all be headed off to wherever they're going to go. Professionally, I've had a pretty eclectic career. I've started off and worked as a school counselor, collegiate basketball coach, teacher, assistant principal, and a principal. And much of that work, 11 years, was done at international schools overseas. I'm an author who's also starting to consult and train.
And Craig, you've gone all in on authorship, and your book is Trust-Based Observations, Maximizing Teaching and Learning. Tell me about taking that leap into full-time authorship. How did that risk translate for you in terms of all of your different roles?
I mean, I was really lucky. My mentor in my principal certification program, he's the one where I didn't know at the time, but that really started me on the path that ended up becoming Trust-Based Observations. He's a really amazing, amazing guy. And I was just doing sort of what he started, and then it was developing and developing and developing over time. And then in 2016, the head of the school I was at, for the first time, asked me to share out and train other principals. And then we talked about maybe expanding it beyond that. And then, so I thought, maybe I'll present. So I presented at a conference and it went really well. And they had to bring in 20 extra chairs because it was so popular. And then thought, I'll write an article. And it was accepted. And so for Learning Forward, I had an article written. And then we were coming home and my wife and I just said, let's do it. And I literally went to a coffee shop from Monday to Friday and wrote a book. And then it came out in September.
Craig, the foundation of your writing and of your work is on improving performance by changing the way we observe and provide feedback for growth. And so if we're sincere about improving performance and therefore improving in the education setting outcomes for kids, improving the effectiveness of what we're doing, how did the concept of trust become so important to you as an educator, as an author and advocate?
I never really loved the observation process. Even when it was run by people at their best, it just felt too infrequent. Just all these things that you're told afterwards, it was sort of overwhelming. And then I had a stretch where for 2 years, I wasn't observed at all, which is more common than we might think. And around the same time, somebody said, Craig, you ought to get your principal certification. And then I met this man that ran my program, Warren Aller. And I just remember the first day in his supervision class, he just said, you have to be in classes every day, observing teachers and then giving reflective feedback and asking questions and supporting their growth and helping them to get better. And he had this passion. And then we would practice every day. We'd bring in lessons and then we'd teach them. And one of us would observe. And then we would have a reflective conversation that was anchored by 2 questions that still anchor it today. And they were, what were you doing to help students learn? And if you had it to do over again, what might you do differently? And so by the time we were done with that class, we'd done it so much, I was really confident in my ability to do it. I had a mentor principal who was at a point in his career where he wanted somebody who was young and enthusiastic. And so I think I fit the bill. I told him what I wanted to do. He said, yeah. Right away, when I started asking these questions to real teachers, not just people in my class, they were saying things like, oh my gosh, no one's ever asked me about my teaching before. These are people that have been teaching for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years, and no one's ever asked them about their teaching. So the next thing we would do is we would talk about, after asking those questions, we would share what we observed. But it was just strengths, no numbers or ratings or anything like that. And teachers loved that too. You could see them sometimes blushing, and you could tell that was fairly foreign to them too. So there was no negative stuff. And I didn't get feedback right away, partially because I felt like, I don't know these guys. What if I get feedback in something that they're really good at and I just didn't see it because we see them so rarely, even when I was seeing them more frequently. And then part of it was, to be honest, the new guy wanting to be liked. And so as that's happening, maybe the third visit through, a bunch of teachers started saying, okay, but what can I get better at? And not knowing it at the time, somehow that together was all asking them and listening, sharing strengths and waiting. I don't think I knew it was trust at the same time, but really that's what it was. And then because of that, what I realized, teachers were willing to just take huge, bold risks to grow their practice. And so that's really how the whole passion developed, because you'd see the results and you see teachers were so happy and teachers are supporting each other. It built a culture of trust. It's pretty amazing.
Something I think that we agree on and have landed on together is that in order to earn trust that makes that possible, we have to first demonstrate that we're trustworthy. Yeah. And so I wonder about your approaches about developing trustworthiness. And further, how do we counter a sense that trust is necessarily deserved as a prerequisite of being a supervisor or a building principal or a workplace leader?
I don't know if it is deserved. I mean, I think it has to be earned. I don't think because I have a title, I'm worthy of something. I don't buy that. So let's throw that out and say it does have to be earned. And so I think there's all kinds of ways we earn it. I think kindness, empathy, being nice, listening, all those kinds of things. Brene Brown, she talks about trust as a marble jar, and it's a marble at a time. And so I think every single thing we do as a leader matters. Every email we write, everything we say in front of our staff at a meeting, everything we might say in the hallway that anybody else could hear, because I think it takes a lot of time to build trust. And I think one thing can destroy it right away. And so I think all those things factor into building trust. And there's more that trust-based observations has to, but I want to touch on one other thing that I think really interferes with trust. The current models of observation that rate you either 1 to 4 or needs improvement, outstanding, or whatever different terminology you use, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did a 7-year measure of teacher effectiveness study, 7 years, $200 million. And the design was to improve graduation rates, quality of teaching, and student learning outcomes through the development of a more robust evaluation process. 7 years, $200 million. And what they found was there was no improvement. So that tells us somehow something's not working. And then on top of that, there's a man in Great Britain named Matt O'Leary, and he is the predominant researcher on observation and evaluation in the world. And all of his research found, and I think this is key, is like to why that's not working and how trust factors in, is that as soon as we start to rate teachers, and by rating, I think he means pedagogy. As soon as we start to rate pedagogy, because pedagogy is close to our hearts, right? That's what we're doing in a class every day. Teachers start to play it safe. They fear. And so then they don't take risks. They're less likely to innovate and less likely to be creative in their classes. So one, the whole system that we have gets in the way of trust. And then we have to do things to build trust as well.
And you mentioned fear, Craig. Yeah. And of course, as we know, if you're experiencing fear, that's what's going to trigger self-protection. Yeah. That's where your stress levels are going to rise, your apprehension, negative anticipation of consequences. That can lead either to breakdown or shutdown. And as you said, not only to play it safe, the system prevents us as leaders and coaches from observing people at their best. I think you'd agree that education is among the most personal professions. In so many respects, we are what we do. And so the key is to cultivate conditions where people feel safe to be themselves, to take risks, and to welcome the feedback. How does trust translate into fueling growth?
I'd say there's a bunch of factors that happen to that. One is frequency, right? So we talked to marble at the time. So in the model, we're doing 12 visits a week, 12 observations and 12 reflective conversations, because how does a relationship with trust happen if I'm seeing you once or twice or 3 times a year? So frequency, but even then, like when we're with the teachers we go into their room, so it's their space, so they feel safer. We sit beside them instead of across from them, where we're transparent when everything we're writing out. And so there's no hierarchical difference because of my job title and I'm sitting across from you. Mm-hmm. All those things factor into trust. And then when we're in classes so much, we start to really understand who's really, really good at what particular areas of pedagogy. And so then we can tap into that with our other teachers to help teachers teach each other and support each other. So once we get to that point where teachers, and sometimes we'll say, take a whole year. We're playing the long game. I mean, minimum 3 visits. But if you feel the walls are up because somebody's had a tough principal for 20 years doing an old system, take a whole year to show, if you need to show trust. But then at a certain point in time, you just say, would you like to hear a suggestion? And even then, that's I'm asking permission. I'm not telling you what I'm going to do. I've only had one teacher say no, and I said okay. And then we waited, and 2 or 3 other visits later, they were able to do it. And then when you offer that too, so many times, if we think about the traditional model, we're just talking about, well, you got to get better at this. It's not supported. So we have to, if we're going to really have trust, it has to be supported. So I have to have all my ducks in a row ahead of time. If I'm going to ask that you get better with learning targets, then I'm going to make sure that I've got my teacher that does learning targets, who's ready to help, or I'm going to have some articles, and we're going to be able to keep talking about it the next visit and supporting you all the way so you know it's safe. One of the things that we talk about in trust-based observations, and I think this is so key, our observation template only has 9 areas of pedagogy on it because research says more than 10 and we start to lose the forest through the trees. But in addition to those 9, we have one other area on there that's not a pedagogy area. It's only a reminder for the observers, and it says risk-taking and innovation. And that is there for one reason and one reason only. For the observers to convey over and over and over until the teacher knows it's true, the message that if I come into your classroom and you're trying something new and it's a disaster, it bombs, it goes completely sideways, I want you to know with confidence that the next day when I come into your room, you're going to get a congratulatory fist bump. When we have those conditions and we put everything together to do that, people will persist in taking risks. When they persist in taking risks, improvement will necessarily follow.
It sounds like you're advocating for changing and building a culture within a workplace where supervision or observation for growth may eventually be welcomed rather than feared, or at the very least, the assumption is there that a supervisor is walking in for all the right reasons. And, educators have such a unique workplace. It's very rare in a workplace where a supervisor, an assessor, an evaluator would come into your workspace, sit down, watch you do what you do, take notes, and then say, okay, I'll talk to you about this later.
It's so funny you say that because I wrote 2 examples of exactly that. I said, could you imagine being a barista and your boss comes in, sits behind the counter, plops their laptop down, rates you on 60 some different indicators. Maybe they say goodbye, maybe they don't. They don't know if there's anything wrong with the machine. They don't know if you had particularly cranky customers that day, like our students can sometimes be. And then the next day you have to wait back and hear what they say and know that potentially my job depends on that. So you nailed that. So thanks so much for bringing that up. So what I'm calling for is changing it completely, the system. My mission is to change the system of observation, whether it's trust-based or something else, so it's based on what works. We know from that study that what we're doing now, evaluating, doesn't work. Look, every job in the world you have to evaluate. I get that. But here's what my belief is. In teaching, professionalism, like am I doing the things I'm supposed to be doing and getting those done in a timely fashion, all that kind of stuff. That's fair to evaluate in teaching. I think collegiality and collaboration, definitely in the education field, is vital with all the different people. And so I think that's fair to evaluate. And I think planning and preparation, because that's so key to success. I think those are fair to evaluate. Rating pedagogy does us no good. 1, 2, 3, 4, and talking about these incremental little changes or that, is that really what's going to make the difference in our students' learning? I think it's big, impactful, new things we're doing to our teaching that are going to really make a difference. So trust-based observations calls for eliminating the rating of pedagogy and instead replacing it with the rating of mindset. But I got to tell you, there's a caveat to that, is that we build it in. So basically, you're going to be proficient almost by default. And so what we've done is, because earlier I talked about all the teachers that are really particularly good at each area. So in each one of those 9 areas, we will run monthly professional development community, 9 pedagogy areas, 9 professional development communities. And even though we don't have a rubric that we use, there is a rubric that at the beginning of the year, the teachers can use to self-assess themselves. And based on that, choose whichever one of those 9 areas to create an action research goal. And so that's being supported all year. And every time we go into the observation reflection conference, in addition to those 2 questions, we also ask, how's it going with your action research goal? So we can help support them all the way through. And so basically, unless you choose not to do that, you're going to be proficient in mindset, in having a growth mindset. And so I'm saying change the whole system. It's not working. Why do we have to persist in, the old thing, pushing your head against the wall and expecting something different to happen? It's not working. Let's do something different. This works. The results are that the risks that people will take to transform practice are amazing. So then you have this whole community of empowered teachers supporting and trusting each other. Like, doesn't that sound better? Let's change.
Craig, is there a way to marry this approach with what I think is quite common in many states and provinces, that is a standardized, regulated approach to teacher observation, both of new teachers in their developing of their novice years and also experienced teachers?
That's an excellent question. In the US, and I'm sure in Canada as well, many states and probably provinces and districts have legislative mandates about things that have to be done and done a certain way. And it's going to be a timely process. I don't think this is going to be an overnight change. I will say that almost every district that I know of has something also in their language that talks about innovation. I think we're going to see cultural changes. I think we're going to see an improvement in social and emotional intelligence, because if teachers know it's okay to risk and fail, then aren't they going to model that for their kids? And then isn't that going to manifest with our kids taking more risks too? So I think we also have to develop maybe some kind of a different assessment system that includes additional things too. But over time, that's how it's going to happen. And so I know already we do have some districts that are looking at, okay, let's write an innovation plan so we can start this.
There's tremendous potential for anyone listening, whether they are educators or whether they are managers or leaders within a workplace, to reflect on how the role of trust and developing trustworthiness is key to improving the eventual outcomes of whatever the business is. In education, it's about improving outcomes for kids. It's about improving kids' lives and making sure that they arrive, enjoy, and leave school feeling glad they came.
If we can create those types of environments where the people we're working with feel like they're supported by us, and encouragement and innovation and creativity and risk-taking are embraced as being the highest forms of learning that you could have is by taking these chances, then I just think that the rest will follow automatically. But it's on us to create conditions of trust where people feel safe taking risks.
Craig, your book is Trust-Based Observations, Maximizing Teaching and Learning Growth. Craig, how can our listeners keep in touch with you to learn more?
They can get a hold of me on Twitter at TrustBasedCraig, at LinkedIn at TrustBasedCraig. I have a website, trustbase.com, so that's pretty easy. My email, anybody is welcome to email me. It's Craig at trustbase.com, and you can get the book on Amazon or other places as well. So any of those ways, I'm available.
Craig, I want to thank you so much for the conversation. I also want to thank you for your advocacy in creating workplaces where trust and trustworthiness are the foundation, and for helping shift mindsets from observation to conversations for growth. It's been great getting to know you. Thanks so much for your time and for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Brad. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to spread the word on trust-based observations.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Good News, Brad News podcast. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment wherever you found this podcast. And if you like what you heard, please recommend Good News, Brad News to a friend. And please hit me up on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. You can find me at Brad, BRAD, _Hughes, HUGHES. I look forward to hearing from you and to reconnecting with you on our next episode. Until then, get out there and do amazing things.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.